We're in the Dr. Stephen Lacy's private museum, who I consider one of the leading foremost historians for Utah, especially when it has to deal with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, but everything dealing with Utah. Dr. Steve Lacy has researched it and knows more about it than anybody I have ever met. And so with that said, Dr. Lacy, tell us about yourself and how you got interested in this stuff.
Well, this is coming up on 58 years that I've been doing research on Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, Matt Warner, and the Robbers Roost Gang. First off, there was no Wild Bunch. I always thought there was. There was lots of rumors, but the Wild Bunch came into an existence in 1902, long after the gang had disappeared. The gang, Butch and Sundance and Kid Curry and Etta Place went to South America in 1902, and that's when they first started using the name The Wild Bunch, because a dime store novelist had coined the phrase, and then the Pinkertons started using it on their files. And before then they were called Hole in Wall, not Hole in the Wall. It was called Hole in the Wall, Hole in Wall, and Robbers Roost Gang, Browns Park Gang, and a number of other names. But I was in 4th grade, and our teacher said, you need to keep a scrapbook of current Utah events, of history, and I chose Carbon County. I was living in San Juan County, in the town of Blanding, Utah, but I liked the name Grayson, which was the original name, and so I wrote to Carbon County because I was born in Dragerton, Utah, and I wrote to Carbon County. They sent me some information, pamphlets and so forth, and there was a photograph of the Butch Cassidy and the Fort Worth Five, and I liked that picture. Had no idea who they were. And I put that picture in my scrapbook. I still have the scrapbook and didn't realize it would be a major part of my life. In 1954, my father, who was Claude Lacy, was doing uranium out in San Juan County and Wayne County, and he stumbled across the secret hideout of Butch Cassidy's from 1896 and 1897. And in that hideout that he found a magazine under this rock. And it says, I wonder who will find it. And the magazine was from the 1890s. And he brought it home, and I can remember we lived above my grandparents' beer joint in Wellington, Utah, and that magazine went back and forth between our apartment upstairs and my grandparents' beer joint, because my grandparents hooked on to the beer joint living, and that passed back and forth for a number of years. And I don't remember the name of the person that signed it. My dad didn't remember. But we talked about going out to where these signatures were in the rock for years and years. So in 1984, I convinced my dad to go out there, and we found it. My dad hadn't been there since 1954. And we found it just before sunset, and those signatures were awesome.
Yeah, I bet they would have been.
And it was so cool to look at the signatures, and then I got to doing more research there and realizing this is where Butch and Elza Lay and Etta Place and Maud Davis spent the winter of 1896 and 1897 there. And you could see right where they had their tent, Butch and Etta, because Butch was involved with Etta before Sundance was, because it was his cousin. And Elzalay was with his common-law wife, Maud Davis, and it was an awesome place.
I'm going to have to twist your arm and make you take me out there one of these days.
I'll have to do that. I'll have to do that. But anyway, I got to know a lot of people that were involved with the gang. I was lucky enough to be born and know a lot of the people that were still alive that were associated with Butch and the gang, of knowing Pearl Baker, who wrote The Wild Bunch at Robber's Roost, Joyce Warner, whose father was Matt Warner. She gave me many insights. She helped me write the new revision on Last of the Bandit Riders. And we brought out the revision in 2000, and now we have a new one that will be coming out, is Last of the Bandit Riders Revisited Again. And this
so this is the new one that you're going to be coming out with.
Yeah, this is the new one that's going to be
not out yet.
It's not out yet, but it has like 183 new pages.
Wow.
And it finally tells what happened to Butch Cassidy. We mentioned it in the last edition, but this has a story about what Butch told when he came back. It's never been published before, of the story that he told when he told Joyce the story. And it is really, really cool. And it also tells what happened to the rest of the gang members.
Uh-huh.
And all photographs that have never been published before. Tons and tons of photographs. I've spent my life gathering photographs. I have over 5,000 photographs of Butch and the gang that I've collected, from family members to government records and so forth, that I've spent. My whole goal putting the book together it's like opening up a trunk for the first time. And in that trunk you find telegrams and letters and newspaper clippings. And you make the decision when you look at them. I don't like somebody just telling me what the conclusions are.
Yeah.
I like looking at the documents and so forth myself. There's too many people that will come and tell you what the results are. I let you decide yourself. Look at the documents, look at the photographs, and so forth. I talked to prison guards and newspaper reporters that covered the events that took place in later years. I was lucky enough to be raised at a particular time to know these people. And I had, in all of my writings, I'm the author of 10 books. And I was lucky enough to know, and if I write a story or be involved, I have to have a connection. I don't just up and decide to write something today. I have to have a connection. I either have to know that person or know a relative of that particular person. I have to have a connection to them. I just don't decide, today I'm going to write an article on Jack Dempsey, unless I knew. But I did know Jack Dempsey. I met him years ago in New York. But Jack Dempsey had a connection to Matt Warner.
I didn't know it. But I want to stop real quick, because you said that you've written 10 books, and I know that. But also, you have produced a bunch of TV programs and documentaries and things like that. So, you're just not, a historian that's gathered and wrote a few books, man. You're
I had my own TV show called Centennial Photo, which was on Channel 4. I did 339 shows on the history of Utah through photos and film footage. I had 3 of my TV shows that were nominated for Emmys. The first one was Old Fights, Good Times, the J. Brack and Lee story, which won Best Documentary for 1989.
Cool.
And J. Bracken Lee was governor of Utah, 9th governor of Utah. He was mayor of Price, mayor of Salt Lake, and one of my best friends. And I did one on Posey, The Last Indian War, which was the subject of my 9th book. And it was The Last Indian War took place in Blanding, Utah in 1923. The second The Last Indian War took place in 1915 on my family's property in Bluff, Utah. And I knew a lot of the people that were involved in that last war because they were still alive. The last person involved in that war died in 1995. It's hard to believe that we still had people alive that were involved in Indian wars in 1995.
Wow, yeah.
And my first book was called The Lynching of Robert Marshall, which was about a Negro who was lynched in Price, Utah in 1925. And I knew a lot of people that were involved in that were still alive. J. Bracken Lee, the former governor, was there who witnessed the lynching. And there was between 800 and 1,000 people who watched the lynching. It was one of the most horrible events that happened in Utah, of mob violence, and women were just as violent as men. My second book was called Whatever Happened to Denise Sullivan, about a 15-year-old girl who was kidnapped. Her mother was shot and killed, and the mother's boyfriend was shot, and then the kidnapper shot and killed himself. And the girl has never been found that was kidnapped. But my father was in on the search. My uncle was involved in the search. And my cousin's father-in-law was in charge of the search in Moab. It happened at Dead Horse Point. So that was my connection to the event. So there's lots of fun things that I've collected over the years to make fun things. I did TV specials on that, and I've collected over the years. I've got over 60,000 photos that I've collected.
I believe that.
Over the years. I have a lot of photos that are just negatives that I haven't collected, made prints of them yet. That just some fantastic photos that I've collected all over the place. Historic photographs. I love history.
Yes, you do.
And I love photographs. One photograph will turn me on more than anything else because of that particular history. I've seen so much stuff of people throwing away history. And right behind me is my display of Butch Cassidy, Matt Warner, and the Robbers Roost Gang. I've spent so much time gathering material, and it excites me. I love to give tours of people and show them of my history. I love to share. In my museum, I've been listed as a nonprofit museum since 1990. And I have a replica country store from the 1890s up until the 1960s. And when I first started collecting material, I put in boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff. When I lived at my old house, I lived there 25 years. And in fact, I'm surprised the floor didn't fall in because I had so much stuff.
I remember that because that's where I first met you, is at your old place where you had your old museum. And there was just like now, I think you got a lot bigger place and you got a lot more stuff.
But actually, most of the stuff this is all of the stuff that I had before. I've got a few more things, but most of the stuff was in boxes and in my basement and so forth. But I had a goal that I was going to display all of these things and so forth. I wanted history to live. I originally wanted mechanical mannequins that moved and talked and explained history and so forth. Butch Cassidy and Matt Warner and the Sundance Kid always excited me. When I taught school down in Emery County, I taught radio and TV broadcasting. My students and I did Butch Cassidy radio dramas that were heard in 5 states.
Cool.
And it was really cool because we, one of our first interviews that we did, besides interviewing Pearl Baker, we interviewed Lulu Parker Bettinson, Butch's last sibling that was alive. And we interviewed her twice. And one of the interviews we did was we won an award with her. And it was fun because we got to spend time out at the family homestead where the family grew up, where Butch only lived just a short period of time, off and on for a year and a half. They've just restored it, but you know, Butch and his 2 brothers were also outlaws in the family. Dan Parker, who was known as Kid Ricketts, and his brother Arthur, who was known as Kid Parker, was only an outlaw for just a short period of time because he was killed in a horse race over in Telluride, Colorado. And Dan Parker, he was the first outlaw of the family to get caught. He got caught for stagecoach robbing in 1890 and was sent to federal prison in Detroit. And he was there for about 7 years and then got out and was reformed. Matt Warner spent 3.5 years in the old Sugar House prison, and everyone says he got pardoned, and he never got pardoned. He served his 3.5 years and got out, and Governor Wells offered Butch amnesty. And people says, oh, he didn't get offered amnesty. He did. He got offered amnesty because he did not rob the Castlegate mine payroll robbery.
That seems like I remember that was a big thing, that he did rob it, but he didn't.
He did not. They indicted Butch and Elzalay for the robbery because they fit the description. But when a year later, when Johnny Herring and Joe Walker were killed, they were positively identified as the 2 men who had robbed the Castlegate mine pay robbery. Whatever their names were, they were positively identified. And I have copies of the original documents that says that they were positively identified. But because it was not Butch, the Pleasant Valley Coal Company did not want to pay the reward. They paid the reward on Joe Walker because there was a reward out for him. They paid that reward, but they didn't pay Butch's. And had Butch robbed the Castlegate mine payroll robbery, Governor Wells wouldn't have offered amnesty.
Yep.
And also, this was in 1900. And also in 1900, Butch was interviewed by a reporter in the Salt Lake Tribune and said, I didn't rob the Castlegate mine pay robbery, and I can prove it. And people will say, well, you know, outlaws will all say that I didn't do it. I didn't do it. But Butch didn't do it. And he had no reason to lie. And there was that rumor that was going around the last 25, 40 years that Butch turned into a pistol with the amnesty. And that was not true. He did not turn in any pistol. That pistol, a few years ago, sold for $175,000. It was not Butch's, but somebody paid $175,000 plus the premium that went along with the auction price. So somebody paid a lot of money
because they thought it was
nothing.
Wow.
So
they're going to be mad at you saying this on this video.
Well, maybe, but there was other people that had doubted it.
Oh.
But the guy that had prepared the pistol originally supposedly had other famous pistols that mysteriously became supposedly authentic that weren't.
Mm.
You know, but anyway, there are no documented Butch Cassidy pistols around. There's a pistol that one museum shows that Butch had when he went to prison in 1894 that somebody hung on to because they knew Butch Cassidy was going to be famous when he went to prison, which is total BS. There's no way that there's any pistols that is documented so far. There could be some pistols of his someplace, but there is no documented pistols of Butch Cassidy's around. And Butch Cassidy wasn't as nice as everybody made him out to be. Sure, he was nice in some ways, but Butch was one of those individuals that was always scheming. He tried to get out of work. That's the reason why he was an outlaw. Most of the outlaws tried to make an easy living. That's the reason why they were outlaws.
Makes sense.
And when you went in to rob a bank or hold up a train, you went because with a gun, you knew that you might have to use it. You don't go in and say, well, I'm just taking my gun in and I'm going to scare them. And that is not true. Because I talked to an old-time bank robber, and he says, you don't go in just to wave the gun around. You know you might have to use it. And if the time had come around, Butch would have used his pistol. You know, and we don't know if Butch used it. You know, if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you got in a fight with somebody, you could kill him and bury him in a shallow grave and nobody would know. Not saying that Butch did, but we don't know. We don't know that for sure. Butch didn't rob the Winnemucca bank robbery. That was done an inside job by the bank manager, George Nixon, who was short of some money, and he hired some, I believe Sundance Kid was involved in that, but Butch was not. And Butch was not involved in the two Wyoming train robberies that blew up the trains because he made a promise that he would not do any robberies in Wyoming. And he kept his word. So I'm not sure where he got his money, but he did not do the two train robberies in Wyoming. One author has attributed Sundance to the Telluride bank robbery with Butch and Tom Mccarty and Matt, and he was not involved in that. The Telluride was with Tom Mccarty, Matt Warner, Butch Cassidy, Dan Parker, and Arthur Parker. But before then, their first job was the Moffett bank robbery in Denver, Colorado. All four of them were involved in that, and Tom Mccarty was the main one. They used a little bottle of water that they claimed was nitroglycerin, and they were able to get away with a whole bunch of money. And it was an exciting thing because they got the bank to write out a check for thousands of dollars, and they got it cashed. And when they were chasing after Tom, here was Butch, and here was Matt, and here was Dan and Arthur, and they kept saying, well, they went this way, and they went this way, and they got them searching all over the place, and they never caught up with Tom. Tom Mccarty was Matt Warner's brother-in-law, married his sister.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And Tom came from an outlaw family. Tom's brother, Billy, was also an outlaw. Billy's son, Fred, was an outlaw. Billy and Fred and Tom robbed the Delta, Colorado Bank September 7th, 1893. And in my display case, I have the spur that Billy wore the day he was killed. And Tom got away. Billy and Fred were both shot and killed. In fact, Billy's top of his head was blown off. It was a wicked, wicked time. One writer has Eck Hambrick, which is Billy's stepson, being involved in the robbery, in which he was not, over at Delta, Colorado. But Tom supposedly threatened William Ray Simpson, who was the guy that worked at the hardware store. He's the one that shot him with his rifle and killed Billy and Fred. And they were both buried in the same coffin, probably just a box, in Delta, Colorado. And Matt knew all of them because they were his relatives. And they hung around up in Washington. Matt was all over the place. Matt started out as an outlaw. When he was 16, he got in a fight with a kid over in Louvain over a girl. And he grabbed a slat off of a picket fence and hit the kid over the head, and he thought he killed the guy. And the kid ended up a nut. They sent him into the mental hospital in Provo, and years later they let him out, and Matt came to visit Louvain, and that guy tried to shoot him and missed, hit Matt in the head. The bullet went through his hat. They caught up with him, sent him back, and then they let him out again. He ended up killing this guy that wore his dad's military uniform on the 24th of July parade. Shot the guy's head off. And then they finally sent him back to the mental thing. He was completely out of it.
I remember you telling me a long time ago about a story about Matt Warner. He was getting chased. I think it was down the San Rafael Swells, and he found a cabin, or he hid up high. I've seen some stuff, but he was hid from the... Tell that story.
Okay, 30 bags of gold is what we call it. 30 bags of gold. Matt was on the run with the posse chasing him. He was down in the San Rafael area, and Matt had been pushing his horse really strong. Now, most of the outlaws, when you're on the go, you push those horses faster and harder.
Yeah, I would imagine.
You're probably really hard on those animals.
Yeah.
Anyway, they shot us at Matt, and they wounded Matt's horse. Matt went on that horse until it died. And he was right near a lone cottonwood tree. That was all that was there. And Matt jumped down, and he grabbed his saddlebags because they had some treasure in it. He climbed up that lone cottonwood tree, and he had his rifle with him, his pistols, and he was going to fight him off. He was far enough ahead that he had time to climb the cottonwood tree. And he gets up to the top, and he realized he could see this little cave overhang, and it's just a small little thing up on the side of the rock. And he realized, well, I have a better chance of climbing up there and hiding. So he climbed down and went up there, and you couldn't see where his tracks were because it was the rocks and everything. Anyway, the posse shows up, and they look around, and see Matt had laid down in that little cave, and they looked around for hours trying to find his tracks, and they could not find him at all. After a few hours, they took off. And Matt got stirring around and realized there was 30, it looked like salt sacks. You know, salt used to come in cloth sacks. And he opened one of them up, and it was gold dust. There was 30 of them is what he figured. There was 30 salt bags of gold. course, he was on foot, and he put a couple in his saddlebags, some down his pants, his shirt, and he was on foot, so he really couldn't carry much, and he took off. Of course, you're on the run. You don't remember landmarks.
How you got there? Or, yeah.
And so he took off, and so for years after, he tried to find where that was, and maybe the people that originally put it there came back and got him. But he always told his daughter that that's what he was looking for, was those gold. And he put his signature in the rock in 1920, February of 1920, when he was out there with Eck Hambrick. Eck Hambrick's signature is up in the rock, up a little further on the rock there, but he also did his cow with axle grease and his brand. And in San Rafael. But that's what he was out there doing, was trying to find.
So I know that was kept pretty secret. How did you find out about that?
Joyce told me about it.
That's his daughter.
His daughter. Joyce. She was the youngest in the family, and she knew a lot of things that a lot of people didn't know, because she had helped her father put the manuscript together of his original book, Last of the Bandit Riders. And in fact, the original book was put together with Murray King, but Joyce had done most of the work 2 years prior to Murray King being involved, because Joyce had taught type, and knew shorthand, and so she had helped prepare the manuscript, and so she knew all these questions and stuff, and also learned things of the manuscript, stories that Matt told his son Boyle, because Matt told stories to Boyle that he didn't tell Joyce, because things you tell a boy and things you tell a girl are a lot different. And so Boyle told things down years later, and Joyce wrote those down, those stories and everything. And so I had the privilege of reading those stories and having that history to work with. And it was quite interesting to know all of those things that went on that Matt had told his son, because Matt was a practical joker. He was one of those that tried to get out of doing work, but he was also mean. If a horse didn't work for him, he got rid of that horse. If a gun didn't work and it had a hair trigger or something on it, he threw that gun away. Boyle mentioned that they went out on rabbit hunting, and this one pistol messed up, and Matt grabbed a hold of that pistol and just threw it.
Really?
And Boyle says, "Well, how come you did that?" And he says, "Well, if that gun is not dependable when you need it, it's no good." And Matt always said, crime does not pay. There was many times that when you're on the run, you can't build a fire because the posse will catch up with you, and you had to sleep with your back against a rock so that nobody can come up against you from the back. And it was cold, and the rain, and the snow. And one thing that he always liked to do, and I've mentioned this a bunch of times, he always ate his dessert first, because you couldn't guarantee that you're going to get through the meal and eat the dessert last. So he always ate his dessert first. But Joyce always says that her and her sister Gyla had boys that come over to take them out. And Matt would visit with them and talk, and pretty soon it was getting late, and they hadn't gone out on their dates. And Matt would say, "Oh, it's getting late. I guess you can't go out." But he'd talk to them and told them all kinds of stories in his past life and so forth. So it made a big difference. He always entertained people with his stories and so forth. He later became deputy sheriff and justice of peace of Carbon County, Utah. He was deputy sheriff, ran for sheriff twice. The first time he used Willard Erastus Christiansen, which was his real name. And then in 1918, he changed his name officially to Matt Warner. And he ran under the name of Matt Warner. He lost. He lost both times by landslide. And people says, oh, he won by a landslide. That's not true. He didn't win. But he was respected. He was sent out to collect taxes. And he was the best tax collector because he put his pistol on. He never threatened anybody, but he had that pistol, and he says, I come to collect taxes. And he just hit his hand on his pistol, and people come up with money or ways to pay for taxes. And also, but Matt Warner and J. Bracken Lee and 2 or 3 other members of the Price City Council went on KSL radio in August of 1938 on Empire edition of the Salt Lake Tribune and KSL, and they talked about the first Robbers Roost Roundup.
Oh, really?
And Matt Warner told about his days of being an outlaw, and they reenacted some of the events that happened to Matt Warner. And Matt told about sending the deputy sheriff of Emery County without his pants out of Robbers Roost. And I think they cleaned it up. I think they sent him out without his clothes, not just in his underwear, his red underwear, but I think they sent him out without his clothes on. But later on, he became close friends with Matt Warner. In fact, there's a picture of him and Matt and Butch and Dan and Sundance and Arthur and Elzalay in front of the Matt Warner Saloon in Green River, Utah.
So that radio broadcast, you don't happen to have a copy of that, do you?
I don't, and I thought it still existed because they had recorded it on great big huge 16-inch disc. And we thought that it might still exist, but so far KSL couldn't find it. They had a number of discs of that same program. And then every year, Matt died in 38, and in 39, J. Bracken Lee went back on the radio, and they retold that because they were talking about the Robbers Roost Roundup. They did it for a number of years, and they retold that same story, but it would be really cool to listen to Matt Warner's voice.
It really would, yeah.
You know, but Matt Warner, he was a nice man in a lot of ways. He witnessed that lynching of Robert Marshall, the Negro, was hung in Carbon County. I take that back. He did not go out to the lynching itself. He saw them bring in the Negro, and he saw that mob violence. And he knew that it was hard to stop the mob violence, and he did not go out to that lynching because he had seen that kind of violence when he was an outlaw, and he didn't want anything to do with it. He saw that crowd, and he turned tail. You know, and J. Bracken Lee's wife, Margaret Lee, remembered him picking lilacs from his yard and going by the courthouse, and he'd stop by and take lilacs to Margaret Lee at the courthouse. You know, that's how kind-hearted he was. Matt Warner never learned to drive. He came into the 21st century, but never learned to drive. He always rode a horse. There's a book that came out and claimed that Matt Warner killed this guy that claimed that he was the Sundance, and he wasn't the Sundance, but they claimed that Matt Warner went to Duchesne and shot this guy in the head and killed him. Well, Matt Warner, the only way he could have got there in 33 or 34 or whenever it was to go on a car, and I don't think that Matt would have said, "Oh, would you give me a ride to such and such's house so I can kill him?"
Yeah.
But
well, I know that I worked with a guy in the late 70s, early 80s that just before he passed away, he told me a story how Matt Warner saved his dad's life when they was looking for some Spanish mines up in the by the Mirror Lake area. But, he remembers gathering up the gun that Matt gave his dad to save his dad's life and taking it and giving it back to Matt Warner when Matt Warner became deputy sheriff or whatever. So I guess he had some kindness in his heart.
He did. When he worked hard. But there was other times he figured out ways to do the easy work. But he was one of those that wanted to make sure that the downtrodden was taken care of. If he saw a kid that didn't have shoes, he'd go out and buy shoes for them. And if it meant that his kids had to go without for a little longer, they'd go without. There was many times that his paycheck was signed over to somebody else because he had promised them or owed them money or something. Because I have the paychecks that he signed over. One of the places that he did business and helper was Piggly Wiggly store. And it's got his signature on the check to Piggly Wiggly.
Cool.
And all. But I have a lot of respect for him, all of the research that I've done with Matt Warner. And Matt Warner said that he didn't violate, go outside of the law after he left prison, and that's not true. He bootlegged whiskey. And he got sent to 90 days in jail. And he used the thing that he had been a deputy sheriff. And the judge says, "I don't care if you've been a deputy sheriff or not. You're still going to jail." And he went to jail in the 1920s for 90 days. He was sentenced. But he was involved in lots of things. He lived in Green River. And lived in Price. But Green River, right after, for a year or so, he went looking for Butch to give him the message from Abraham Wells that Wells would offer him amnesty if he would give himself up. But then there was the robbery in Winnemucca, and they just assumed that Butch was involved in Winnemucca. But when they had the Fort Worth 5 picture, and I don't call it the Fort Worth 5, I call it the hole in the wall gang photo. That photo was brought to the manager of the Winnemucca Bank, and not one person was identified in that picture as one that held him up. But so I'm sure that Butch wasn't involved, but in 1911, 3 years after Butch and Sundance was supposed to have been killed in South America, an article came out that was by Sundance.
Oh, really?
Now, I can't believe that they waited 3 years to bring this article out if the Sundance was already dead.
Mm-hmm.
That he tells about the robbery. And that's the reason why I believe Sundance was involved in there, but that Nixon had paid for it.
Mm-hmm. So just emphatically, you know, without a shadow of a doubt, that Butch and the Sundance Kid wasn't killed over in South America. They made it back here.
Well, how I know it, I know it is beyond the shadow of a doubt, is Joyce Warner and her mother had a visit November 21st, 1939, by Butch Cassidy. He was using the name of Frank Ervin, E-R-V-I-N. Came to visit. He had a pass on the railroad. He could travel anywhere he wanted.
Is that something he bought or something?
No, he worked for the railroad.
He worked for the railroad.
For over 20 years.
Okay.
He picked up a copy of Cosmopolitan magazine and Matt Warner's original book. And you can see over there and over here is copies of the Cosmopolitan magazines that Matt Warner's story was serialized, 3 issues of it. And he picked that up and he saw that Matt Warner, where's my old buddy? Found out he was in Price. So he got on the next train and headed to Price. He thought about all of the good times that they had together and all the bad times. And he thought, wow, I'm going to see my old buddy, Matt Warner, in Price. Gets in Price and asked where Matt Warner lived. And he said, oh, Matt died. Matt died. But he went to visit Matt's widow. And Joyce was there. She lived with her mother. And anyway, he visited off and on during that day. And he also visited with Haida. She went by the name of Ada. She hated the name, that name. Matt always named his kids weird names. But anyway, that visit lasted all day. But Joyce thinks that he was afraid to ask to use the bathroom, that he was had problems with the bathroom. Then he'd come back and visit, but he told these stories about, and Joyce finally says, you're Butch Cassidy, aren't you? And he says, yes. How long have you known? And she says, I've known it right from the beginning, because the eyes was the major thing. And they told the same stories. They told about the Moffat bank robbery that Matt never talked about in his original book. And the details just added up. And when he talked about going to visit Haida, Haida knew him before. Joyce never. Joyce's mother didn't know, because that was Matt's second wife. Matt's first wife, Rose, died in 1896. Just right after Matt went to prison. And so Butch knew Haida, and Haida remembered him. She was a little girl at the time, but she remembered him. And so it was a fruitful time. And so when Frank went back to Goldfield, Nevada, they corresponded. There was 3 letters. And when Matt's book originally came out, they sent him a book. He sent some money, and they sent the money back. They said they couldn't charge Butch. But the book came out in 1940. I don't know what the holdup was. I don't know if it was because of the finishing up of the Depression or what the deal was, but the book was a lifesaver for the Warner family at that particular time. Yeah, because things were hard on that Depression, and the Depression was just finishing up. If it hadn't been for World War II, that's what really helped everybody in the country. But anyway, they sent the money back, and there was 3 known letters. And there was this other guy who claimed to be an author, took the other 2 letters and never returned them. and I have the first letter, and he died March 16th, 1943, and is buried in Tonopah, Nevada. And all, but anyway, Joyce was impressed with him, and Joyce had just completed her father's manuscript, and her and her mother wrote down every detail of that particular visit and the story that he told. And so I have the original
cool.
One of him telling the story of the Brookcliff Kid. And all, and it's in third person, and so it's fun. And then the Sundance Kid died June 2nd, 1955 at the Utah State Prison.
So we were just talking about that today, and I'd heard that story before about Hiram Beebe, and you was telling me more about it. Tell the story of Hiram Beebe and how he got sent to prison and how you know he was the Sundance Kid.
Now, there's going to be lots of people that don't agree with me on this, but I believe with all my heart that this is true, because I talked to prison guards. The ID man at the prison, Ray Howder. I talked to one of the reporters from the Salt Lake Herald and the Tribune, Van Porter. He remembered him quite vividly. And my grandfather had a run-in with Hiram Beebe in 1938 in Grand Junction, Colorado. And my father was there, and my uncle. And my uncle remembered the event quite vividly. My uncle was 9, and my dad was 7, and my dad didn't remember the event that well. But anyway, Sundance was using the name Hiram Beebe. He also used the name George Hanlon. Now, one report was the Sundance Kid was 5'9". And you look at the different wanted posters and so forth that the Pinkertons put together. They have Ben Kilpatrick's picture as Harry Longabaugh. And Ben Kilpatrick they called the Tall Texan. Well, Ben Kilpatrick was actually only 5'9", not 6 feet. One circular said 6 feet, but he was 5'9". And one circular said the Sundance was 5'9". One newspaper clipping says 5'7.5", says the Sundance Kid. And I have that in my book. And if the Sundance Kid was 5'7.5", then it's pretty easy to say that he shrunk because he was bow-legged. They mentioned in all the circulars that the Sundance Kid was bow-legged. And in the prison records of Hiram Beebe, he was bow-legged. And he was, when you're bow-legged, and most of those had rickets, your bow-legged gets more and more in later years. Well, when I talked to the prison guards, they told me that he got letters, and this was from Van Porter, the reporter. He got letters from the Longabaugh family, from the New York area, wrote letters to the New York area, and from Cortez, Colorado. They swore up and down, because the Longabaugh was a strange name. And this is before anybody even cared who the Sundance Kid was. Hiram Beebe never, ever claimed that he was a Sundance Kid.
Right.
You look at his court records, and I've got a copy of the second trial, and said that he was in Alaska, he was in South America. And how many people went to South America?
Yeah.
And it was right in there, South America. You look at the picture of Sundance, and at a place was listed as 5 feet wide. And Sundance is about an inch taller. So there's no way that he could have been 5'9".
Yeah.
And somebody says, well, she could have had high heels on. Well, I doubt that. She had a long dress on. You can't tell what shoes she had on, but I doubt that. And also, and then you look at the Fort Worth 5 picture, and Sundance looks a lot smaller than Butch, and Butch was supposed to be about 5'8".
Mm.
So he looks a lot smaller in features and so forth. And when I talked to the prison guards, and Ray Howder, the ID man, said that Hiram's common-law wife, Glam Heasley Beebe, she always brought cereal, Ralston cereal, to the prison for Hiram. And the Pinkertons always said that he was a Ralston health food nut.
The Sundance Kid.
Yeah, and that was in the files.
Mm.
Now, who would have known that?
Yeah.
And that didn't dawn on me until they were telling me that until later on when I looked through all of the records.
Ah.
And these prison guards wouldn't have known that.
Right.
From the Pinkertons. And so there was, I would have liked to have seen some of that correspondence and stuff had they survived of the Longabaugh. But I know that he wrote letters back and forth. Van Porter told me. He says, that was my first beat. I remember.
Huh.
Because Hiram had long beard, long hair. When he got out of hand, they held him down and they trimmed all of his beard and his hair and cut it down. He had no hair, no nothing. And he wasn't as bad to handle then. But anyway, he had his own religion. He had his own manifesto that while he was in prison there. And when he got in an argument with Glam one day in the prison, when she came outside, she was just fit to be tied. And she went out on the front steps of the prison at the point of the mountain, because the prison moved on the 4th of May, 1951. I was 5 days old when that happened. But in 1952, she went out on the front steps, had a heart attack, and died. They took her body to Larkin Mortuary because the prison had a contract for indigent burials. And they got to checking through her clothes when they took her clothes off. Had $6,000 sewed up in the lining of her dress.
That's a lot of money.
Which is a lot of money.
That's a lot of money back then.
Yeah. But she came every week. I don't know if the bus came clear out to the point of the mountain. You know, it was easy to get to Sugar House, but to come clear to the point of the mountain. But she came every week, and she brought supplies and so forth. But he was a feisty guy. But I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that he was a Sundance Kid. And there's a cabin over by Cortez, Colorado, that is right near where his cousins lived, and he stayed with their cousins. And this cabin is where Butch and Sundance and Arthur and Dan had worked for the cattle over there and did horse racing over in Cortez, Colorado. Because it's documented that Matt did horse racings. And Matt actually met Rose, his first wife's father, over there, Morgan, over there. And this dugout is so cool. They fixed it up.
Really?
Like original. And it's right next to some Indian ruins that this housing development is. And it's really, really cool.
So tell the story about how Hiram Beebe got thrown in prison the first time. I think it was Mount Pleasant?
Mount Pleasant.
I guess he was living in Mount Pleasant.
He was living in Mount Pleasant. Before then, he lived in Leeds. Down there, he knew Queen Anne Bassett, which was one of the girlfriends or hang-ons, and Josie Bassett, the Bassett girls, up at Browns Park.
Mm-hmm.
And Hiram knew all of those, the Parkers that lived down in Leeds and Silver Reef in St. George area. And then he moved up to the Mount Pleasant area, and he got in an argument. He was in the beer parlor, and he was getting a little rambunctious, drinking a beer and saying a few words, and Lonty Larson escorted him outside the beer hall and to his truck, and Hiram got his pistol out and shot and killed him. And they took off. He had Glame and Frank O'Banion, and I can't remember the other guy's name. And they took off to their house, and then the police caught up with him. And he was tried twice. The first time the sentence was firing squad, and then they threw it out and then retried him in Carbon County. And then he gave him firing squad again, and then they overturned it and gave him life imprisonment. But he was also supposedly a hermaphrodite, one with both sexes, which would have made him very confused of who he was.
Yeah.
But,
so I don't know that I've never, ever heard that before. So this is kind of interesting.
Well, it was a couple of the prison guards told me that.
Ah.
And supposedly when he died, they sent his body to the medical examiner, but I've never been able to find any paperwork or anything on that. And it may just because, maybe be just because he had long hair that the rumor got started. I don't know. But that's what the prison guards told me. There was one prison guard, Jones, in Huntington, and Clarence Cleland and Buford Rich in Wellington were prison guards that had guarded him and told me all of those things. And Ray Howder, who was the ID man for the prison, and then later became a Salt Lake police man, and Van Porter, who worked for the Salt Lake Tribune and Salt Lake Herald. And they're all dead now, but they were friends. But Van Porter's the one that supplied me with a bunch of pictures of Hiram Beebe and so forth, and then some early pictures of Hiram in the 30s that I was able to get, Inez Day, and all. Glame was with him for quite some time, but she was a lot younger than him. But it's an interesting subject, and in the 40s, before all this took place, there was a guy that later became sheriff of Sanpete County in the 1980s. He came home from World War II and was out to the dump shooting, and because he was on leave, and Hiram was out there, and he showed him how to shoot with the 6-shooter, and they threw the cans up in the air, and he shot all of the 6 shots at the can before the can came down in the air. Before the can came down.
Really?
Yeah.
So he was a good shot.
He was a good shot.
And that was what year?
Was in. He was home on leave in 44, I believe it was. And when they arrested Hiram, there was 50 guns on the mantle. On the mantle. At least that's what I was told.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of guns.
It's a lot of guns. For back then, that's a lot of guns.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of guns now.
Yeah.
You know. So, but he was not trying to cooperate where he was or how old he was, or
he wouldn't give him any information.
He wasn't giving him any information and everything. You look at the transcripts of his second trial, and he wasn't trying to be too helpful on information and everything. And that's the reason why he did not tell anyone that he was the Sundance Kid. And that's before, Matt Warner's the one that made Butch Cassidy famous.
Mm.
It was his original the robbery, Telluride robbery, is one that first gained attention. And then when Matt's trial in 1893 up in Washington brought attention to Butch Cassidy, because Matt and his brother-in-law, George Mccarty, they were held in jail for bank robbery. They escaped, was gone for one day, but it reached the newspapers. And Butch Cassidy's name came in because they had been involved in the Telluride. And then, and that publicity came into effect. And then when Butch robbed Montpelier to get money for Matt Warner's trial in 1896, that's what brought attention. Matt Warner's trial brought attention to Butch Cassidy, and then Matt Warner's book. And in Cosmopolitan is what really brought attention. Charles Kelly brought out his book in 1938. It took 20 years to sell 1,000 copies.
Really?
Yeah. And his second edition came out in 1959. And they lifted a whole bunch of 8 pictures of Matt Warner's from his book, because they merged with Matt Warner's publisher. Matt Warner's publisher just took those 8 pictures out of Matt Warner's book and put it in Charles Kelly's book without permission. And that's what made Charles Kelly's book. Because Charles Kelly didn't have that many great pictures in his book.
Yeah.
And so I've tried to get them to take those pictures out of Charles Kelly's book, and it's like crazy they won't take them out. But they never had permission. They were copyrighted in Matt Warner's original book. But Matt Warner's the one that made Butch Cassidy famous.
So I got a question for you. I don't know if you would know this, but I know where you studied Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and Matt Warner. There's I've searched around a little bit for the Lost Roads mine, and there's stories that Matt Warner, the Sundance Kid, or Butch Cassidy was helping guard that, or doing something with it, or had some. Do you know anything about that at all? Have you run across anything like that in your research?
I've heard rumors of that, but I think a lot of that was perpetrated by a pretend writer. I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to get sued. He also has done research on Butch Cassidy, but when he had access to a lot of good material on Butch Cassidy, and when he came up to against a dead end, he made up stories. And I think a lot of that was made up. Matt may have been involved in some of that, but I don't know where he would have been. In later years, Matt wouldn't have had time to go with the Lost Roads. In the early days, I think that he was spending more time in Washington, state of Washington, up there with Tom and Billy and George Mccarty. He spent time in Wyoming. He spent time at Browns Park, but I don't think he spent a whole lot of time there with the Rhodes Mine. He might have done some, but I doubt it.
Okay. I figured if you would know. Because if you'd have ran across it if you researched him like you did. You'd have ran across it if there was something to it, and his daughter would have known about it. And
there was things that she had that was attributed, but this pretend historian, and I call a lot of people that claim they're historians. There's another guy that claims that he's a major historian, that he's the expert on Butch Cassidy. True West and Wild West magazine claims that they're the Butch Cassidy experts, and they're not, because they have not spent the time with the local people and talked to the local people. One thing in my research that I've done is I've looked at family histories. I bet I've seen 2,000 or 3,000 family histories of Butch coming there and eating and leaving a $5 gold piece or a $20 gold piece. Well, I'm sure that happened maybe half a dozen times, but and they danced with their grandmother or great aunt or something, and I really doubt that happened very often, because he wouldn't have had time to keep up his social obligations of doing robbing and the money. When you're an outlaw and you've done robbery, you got lots of friends. People love you because you spend your money. And you treat them. You buy them meals, you buy them drinks. You don't save your money.
Right.
Because you don't have a bank to keep it in.
Right.
You can carry all that money with you, or gold. And anyway, I can't feature that he spent all that time putting coins all over the place. I'm sure things like that happen sometimes. I don't think that he paid off the mortgage on people's houses and then turned around and robbed the person that after they paid it off. Those are wives' tales that happened with Jesse James and other outlaws. I don't think it happened. Lula tells that story. I've got it on tape. But I think those are stories that she heard, because Lula was, and I dearly loved Lula. She was, a good friend. And those are stories she heard, but she didn't hear it from her family. She heard it from other people. And I don't think that any of that happened. If it happened, it only happened once, maybe twice, if at that. Because, you got your money, and you were greedy. I think you were free when you had the money, and it didn't take long
to go through it. And as soon as that money was gone, you didn't have, those friends were not around there all the time. And people looked up to you because you spent money on them. But if your money was gone, they didn't stick by you all the way. Some family members claimed that other family members were involved, and I agree with that. But one of the present family members said that that wasn't true. But I know that some of the other family members were a little on the shady side because they were disillusioned in the church. Now, I'll get in trouble for saying that. But it was a different time. There was a depression that was going on in Utah, all over the country. Yeah.
And these young boys saw the lure of the mining towns where there was fast women, fast money, and there was excitement going on. Telluride was not a very big town. Park City wasn't a very big town. Bingham was not a very big town. But there was excitement that was going on.
Excitement there, and they were wild. They were a lot of shootings, a lot of women in these mining towns.
There was, compared to what they were used to,
yes.
On the farms. And a lot of people claimed their farms were ranches, which actually in terms were just little farms, you know, and May had a few herds of cattle, and had never been anywhere, never experienced anything in their life, and they saw the lure of fast women, fast money. It was easy, and then you run into people like Matt Warner and Tom Mccarty. Tom Mccarty was a seasoned outlaw, and his brother Billy was seasoned, and it was easy, you know, to rob money and so forth. And you know, they wanted the excitement. They didn't want to be out in the middle of nowhere where there was
plowing a field and
plowing up fields.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they ended up in Robbers Roost where there was nothing.
Yeah.
Or at Browns Park, there was nothing.
Yeah.
Hole in the wall, there was nothing. You know, because there was no other place. And you know, they spent a lot of time. They came to Salt Lake, where there was excitement so that people wouldn't know who they were. But the mining towns, you know, was excitement. You know, they liked being around people. You know, and so it didn't take long to spend that money. They had lots of friends.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they did a lot of experimenting with.
Well, and the way they got it, they wouldn't be worried about getting any more. It wasn't like it was hard earned. So yeah, and knowing that if they got caught, their life was over anyway. So yeah, I imagine they would have just hurried up and spent it, and then went on to the next bank.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that Butch wanted to go straight many times. I know that when he came back to visit Joyce, he told Joyce that his sister Lula was really upset at him because she had blamed him for his mother's death. And but you hear Lula tell that we were just so joyed to see Butch in 1925 because he came back in 1925 and visited the family. But he told Joyce that he says, I'll never go back to visit my family because Lula was so upset. She blamed me for my mom's death, and he felt uncomfortable. But he visited other family members besides Lula. He visited his brother Will. He visited his brother Dan a number of times in the 30s. And a lot of that wasn't ever reported and everything. But he did visit a number because he worked for the railroad. He was a Democrat. He worked on a section crew. His first time working for the railroad was in 1901, before he went to South America. He did work, you know, when he had to, when he was trying to go straight, and everything. But it was difficult. You can't tell me that if you are that close to home, and you didn't drop in. I'm sure that he dropped in a number of times over the years, even while he was on the run from the time that he took off at age 18, even before he went to South America. I'm sure he came home a number of times.
Yeah.
You know, because it was so easy to just drop right in. Even though there was the law looking at the post office, and they said that, well, the post office was looking to make sure that the mail, well, his uncle was the postmaster. So you know that his uncle was looking out for him.
Yeah.
And then there's a picture that this particular picture was taken in Green River in 1889, and
hold it up a little bit higher. Yeah.
At Matt Warner's saloon, and Butch's uncle is in the picture right here, and it is said that Arthur wouldn't have been there. This is Arthur. This is Butch. This is Sundance. This is Dan Parker. And this is Dan Gillis, Butch's uncle. This is Al Zalay. This is Sheriff Farr, and this is Matt Warner. But said that Dan Gillis wouldn't have been there in 1889. Well, because he was in Circleville as a postmaster. Well, he also ran cattle and in Circleville. And the nearest place to run cattle and horses to get good stock, the train depot in Green River. That was the nearest train. And so I could see him going to Green River. And later in 1900, he moved to Green River. So I can see him being with Butch, Dan, and Arthur in 1889. And I can see Arthur being there in 1889, being with his brothers when they're on the run. Matt had a bar there. He had a bar up in Wyoming because Matt bought property and had things going. He had other people running things for him. He was always was trying to get things happening. He bought property all over the place. He did trades. He traded things. He bought a hotel in Colorado on the train. He traded for a hotel and went over and looked at it. On the way back, he traded for something else and got rid of the hotel. So he was always finagling, trying to do something.
That was Matt?
Matt Warner.
Okay.
Yeah. He, in fact, probably, if things would have been different, his second wife probably would have divorced him for all of the shenanigans that he did. He was likable. I think his wife loved him and everything, but things were different because he was always scheming to do something, always trying to eke out a living. But, he didn't have a whole lot of skills, but he tried everything. In Green River, he had an ice plant. Machinery to make ice. Ice was a commodity in Green River because they had those cantaloupe and watermelon and peaches for the market and everything, and so they could ship it on the trains. And when Butch would come to visit, they would have spitting contests where not to spit itself. They would see how far they could spit watermelon seeds. And so they'd bet on it to see who could spit the furthest watermelon seed. And Matt would tell about those experiences of who would go the furthest. And Matt, his wife would say, "Now, I want you to go out and kill a couple of chickens so we have chicken dinner for Sunday." And he couldn't kill a chicken with a hatchet and cut its head off. Couldn't do it because the chicken would look right at him. So he took his gun out there and he'd shoot its head off because it wouldn't look at him, and he'd kill the chicken that way. But I'll tell you another story. Matt always raised pit bulls, and they had dog fights. They had one called Poonts. And this was, he had his nephew, Mccarty, who lived in Green River, and Matt had moved to Price. And there was this drunk, Rue Seeley. And Rue Seeley used to come into Matt's bar in Price and get drunk. It didn't take him long, and he passed out. And this went on for months. And so Matt decided to play a joke. And he had this old crate in the back of the bar, the back alley, and had holes drilled in it. And that's what one of these pit bulls had been in. And so there was air and everything. And so they stripped this Rue Seeley down to no clothes at all and put him in this crate and nailed it up and took him down to the railroad station and sent him down to Green River.
Wow.
Which was 70 miles away. Sent a telegram down to Lynn Mccarty and said, be expecting a package, a special package for you. So Lynn knew that it was this prize pit bull that he had been wanting from his Uncle Matt. Just knew that that's what it was. So Lynn told all of his friends in Green River. And, everybody showed up. And Green River was not very big in those days. And
still not very big.
It was still not very big. But it was excitement. People showed up, and there's ladies showed up with their kids and everything, and they went around there at the train station, and they had that, and they started to pry it open, and all of a sudden Rue Seeley falls out, and he's just as naked, and the ladies are yelling, ah! And trying to cover the face of their children with their skirts so they don't see Rue Seeley, and so Lynn said, go grab me a bottle of whiskey. And they got the Rue drunk again, put him back in the crate, and sent him back to Price.
Shipped him back, huh?
And he didn't know that he'd been gone on vacation. So Matt was a good practical joker and everything. So, and Lynn Mccarty was Tom McCarty's son. He had two sons, Lou and Lynn. Lou was also an outlaw with Matt. But some excitement going on.
Well, like I said, I don't know anybody that studied, researched this stuff, and collected as much as you. And I appreciate you sharing with us. But if, I know you got your book is going to come out, but you don't know when. How do people going to find that out? I know you got a Facebook page. How do people get in contact with you, or how do they get in contact? What's your Facebook page?
Just Steve Lacy, Lacy. The new book is going to be called Last of the Bandit Riders Revisited Again, and it will be the most accurate book on Butch Cassidy, Matt Warner, Sundance Kid, and the Robbers Roost Gang. And remember, there was no Wild Bunch. And so
on your Facebook page, you're always posting pictures, talking about the old times,
yes,
and about your museum, which is incredible. I wish everybody can see it, but I know that you don't really like to show it to everybody because you got a lot of valuable stuff here. The blanket that covered President Lincoln right after he was shot. Matt Warner's prison uniform. I mean, you got unbelievable stuff here. So.
Yeah. Well, and I have Matt Warner's deputy sheriff's badge. It's right behind me. That he wore, and the camera that took the last photographs of Matt Warner. That his daughter Joyce says, I'm going to make sure you get it now.
Awesome.
And I've got a little bit of everything that I've collected.
You got a lot of everything.
And I have a replica of Matt Warner's headstone that I made of his headstone. And just some fun things. It's been a fun journey. A fun journey.
Well, you're an amazing guy, man. You've preserved history like I can't believe. It's just unbelievable. And then what's unbelievable to me is you started at a young age. 3-4 years old, you started saving things. You know?
I think what really got me excited about things, my grandfather, Earl Lacy, was a professional wrestler. And he was up for the World Championship in 1933, and he was the first masked marvel. And after he'd been a professional wrestler, he performed in the carnivals. And my dad and uncle boxed in the carnivals when they were 6 and 7 years old.
Really?
And the stories and the photographs that I have of them in the carnivals, and these were small-time carnivals.
Yeah.
My grandfather made anywhere from $70 to $800 a night in the carnivals during the Depression.
Wow.
On a good time.
That's a lot of
My
money.
dad and uncle, when they boxed, the carnival people would throw in pennies and nickels and dimes when they boxed. And on a good night, they made $70, $80.
Wow, you're kidding.
And my grandmother saved those in jars. And during lean times, when my grandfather wasn't making any money, that's what they lived off of, was the money that they had. And there was a lot of lean times. And then my grandfather was one of those that if somebody gave him a hard luck story, he gave him money. My grandmother had to hide the money because he doled out the money. And he had like 17 cars that he bought, and a lot of them were new, of experimental cars, like a Diana, and I have keys to all these cars you never ever heard of.
Really?
From the 20s into the early 30s, when he was really in the highlight of his career. He was quite the showman. He'd get up on the what they called a bally stand, which was about 2 feet this way and about 6 feet long, and he had an old hot water heater that was up there, and he'd bang on that hot water heater, and he says, "I'm the meanest, toughest son of a bitch around, and I can beat all of you." And he'd take on newcomers for either boxing or wrestling.
Yeah.
And if there wasn't somebody there, then they'd have somebody in the carnival that would be there. And this is before the fake wrestling. And, man, he would just bring in the crowd.
Wow.
Big time stuff.
Wow.
And these are people, in the small towns, there was no entertainment.
Right.
Yep. Some of them very, very seldom had radios.
Yeah.
And all, and they'd bring in the crowds, and man, he was the showman. I've got pictures of him up on the Ballycoo, and he'd bring in the crowds. And I'd listen to those stories growing up, and the entertainment. My major was theater, and I remember those type of things, and that got me excited. And I took 16th in the nation in National Junior College Wrestling.
Wow.
And was wrestling in high school. I coached wrestling when I was teaching school. And so that excited me, and that history of what my grandfather did and got me started. And then in grade school with Butch and the gang, and then that dumb movie, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid movie, started everything too, like everybody else.
Yeah.
And then I knew all these people, of Elzalay's daughter, who was a member of Butch Cassidy's gang, and Butch Cassidy's sister, and Matt Warner's daughter, Pearl Baker, who wrote The Wild Bunch of Robbers Roost, and all of these people that knew Albert R. Lyman, who went through the Hole in the Rock. He was the last survivor of the Hole in the Rock.
Huh?
I visited with him every night when I was after school.
Really?
In 4th grade.
Wow.
And he's the one that said that he despised Butch Cassidy. And he kept asking me if I knew such and such. And I was in, 4th grade, 5th grade. I had no idea who a lot of these people were, you know. But my first manuscript on the lynching of Robert Marshall, I typed on a 1912 Underwood typewriter, because that's the typewriter that he used. I wasn't an author unless I did, and there's the typewriter over there.
Oh, cool.
And so that's how I got started and everything, the excitement and everything. So it's been a long road, but it's been a fun road and so forth. And that's the reason why that I've tried to pass on those type of things to my grandsons and to the people that I've taught.
Yeah.
You know, so that they would preserve history. If we don't get the younger generation excited, there will be no past.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Steve, I appreciate you. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's a wrap.
Okay.